Now, I believe that marriage should be shared. You should share decisions, you should share chores, you should share the remote control. Now, I feel that we do this. But Kathy has a different opinion, at least on the remote control. Now, I don't know why she says that. Just because we're sitting on the couch, she on the left, I on the right, and the remote control just happens to be perched on the arm of the chair to my right. I don't know why she feels that means I'm in control of the remote control, but she does. So there's one thing I really love about the remote control button. There's this button on there that you can push that's the 10-second review. And what that does is it backs up the TV, what you've been watching for 10 seconds. So if I miss a joke or miss some important line, as I sometimes do because I have this hearing issue, then I just hit that button and it goes back 10 seconds and I can hear it again, and maybe this time I'll get it. I use this thing a fair amount. Sometimes for what I miss, sometimes I'll be watching a basketball game and I'll see that the center is set a great screen for the forward on the opposite side, and I know the ESPN guys didn't see it, but I saw it and I want to see it again. And I use this often. Now the problem with this is it's become a bit of a crutch because when I'm in real life sometimes now and I miss something someone said or I want something, I mentally actually push this button. And it doesn't work. Life does not go backwards like that. So I have to be careful about my dependence on electronic devices. There's one button that does work, however, and was my one word for 2014. My one word is a very simple spiritual practice that invites you to choose one word that will be your spiritual focus for the coming year. Not making a resolution, not something you do, but just one word that is something you will focus on, that you will think about. Sometimes it's a word that you may consider, deliberate, and come to and choose. But sometimes it's a word that chooses you. And I want to encourage all of us to do that. We did this last year in our church in Illinois, and I was amazed at how many people did it. About at least half the membership told us what their word was. I don't know how many other folks beyond that chose a word. But you would hear little conversations going on in the fellowship hall, little conversations in the parking lot, at least in the good weather days, about their one word. So I encourage you to give this a shot. And in the way of doing that, I'm going to talk a little bit about what my one word was for 2014 this Sunday. And next week I'll tell you what my one word is for 2015. But you'll pick. Sometimes it's a churchy word, you know, like hope or something, or sometimes it's a word sort of like the one I'm going to tell you about today, which is the one button that I do think is worth pushing and does work. And that's this button. Pause. I don't know about you, but I live my life in fast forward. It's going all the time. Constantly, all the time. I feel like there's always something I ought to be doing. And I hardly ever stop and really think about what it is that I am doing in that particular moment. Thinking about what's next. So, hitting the pause button, that was a word that sort of chose me. Time magazine, about exactly a year ago, at the beginning of February last year, they had a cover story on mindfulness. Mindfulness. And in that cover story they said this: technology has made it easier than ever to fracture our attention into smaller and smaller bits. We answer a colleague's question from the stands at our child's soccer game. We pay the bills while watching TV. We order groceries while stuck in traffic. In a time when no one seems to have enough time, our devices allow us to be many places at once, but at the cost of being unable to fully inhabit the place we actually want to be. That's pretty much the truth. Now I know this. I know that I should slow down. I know that I should stop and smell the roses once in a while, but I don't do it. So I thought, we'll try this one-word thing. We'll adopt this one word and we'll see how it goes. And it actually made a difference. Now, I actually started using my one word in November of 2013 because I was getting ready to preach a sermon on it in January of 2014 to encourage people to choose a word. So we're at Thanksgiving at my mother's home in Tucson, and the next door neighbors are out of town, and so Kathy and I and our 3 kids are staying in this home next door. And I was up, not all that early, really. It's 8 o'clock, 8:15 in the morning, and I'm about to head over to my mother's home next door. And our 3 kids, they're still sleeping. They do that a lot, especially into the morning, into the double-figure hours. So I'm walking by, and the door is cracked where they're all sleeping in one room. And I'm starting to walk by. Something in me thought, okay, Greg, you gotta hit this. Maybe this is a time to hit the pause button. I did. I peeked in the room, and I saw my 3 kids who were in their 20s, 24, 26, 28 then, and they're all sleeping. And I remembered what it was like to look in on them when they were little. How wonderful that was when they were... to just watch them sleep. And so I took about 30 seconds, maybe a minute, just to watch my adult children sleep. Thank God they didn't wake up, because it's really sort of creepy. But in that moment, connecting to who they were from the very beginning and who they are now, it was just sort of a sacred moment that I almost missed if I hadn't hit the pause button. We said goodbye to my mother a few days later. Of course, since it was the Chicago to Tucson thing, I only saw her a few times a year, and said goodbye to her again. And you always think, she was almost ready to turn 80 at that point. You think, when will be the last time that I see her? Might this be the last time? I'm getting on the plane, and I thought, I should tell her that when she is gone, because she's very aware, of that, I should tell her that I'm really going to miss her. I'm really going to miss her. And I resolved to do that. And a few weeks later, on the phone, I did. I'm glad I did. It's not something she didn't know, but I think hearing me say it mattered. So hitting the pause button, not a bad thing. I walk the dog in the mornings and the evenings. Usually I walk the dog when I'm on my way to do something else. So I'm sort of hurrying. Please hurry, please hurry, please hurry. And I always walk the same route. Not here so much, but there in Chicago. I walk the same route all the time. But I decided, let's try it when you're walking the dog, hit the pause button. So I would just try to notice things while I was walking the dog, because Ellie was going to take her own sweet time anyway. I started to notice trees. I think I had to memorize that poem, I think, that I shall never see a picture lovely as a tree before, but I never bought that. Trees are trees. But I started to notice trees and leaves and the different patterns that they have as they reach up toward the sky. And the preachers start to get, actually, the Bible talks about, the trees lifting their hands in joy in Isaiah. I came to really start appreciating trees. I don't think it's an accident that the home we chose here is not just that it's named the Avenue of the Trees, this regal-sounding place, but it's in a grove of eucalyptus trees. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. I'm noticing trees all over now. It's a wonderful thing. Now, Kathy, my wife of 30-some years, she has this regular habit of getting a haircut. And she'll say to me, I'm going to go get my haircut today. And sadly to say, often, 2 or 3 days later, say, how do you like my haircut? So bad that I would sort of, when she would say, I'm going to get a haircut today, I would make a mental note, and an hour later I would text her and say, I really like your hair. Note to the gentleman in the audience, this does not work. But this pause thing, you know how it's fun sometimes just to see someone when they don't know you're watching. Well, yesterday we're painting a room because we're still moving in. And just for a moment, I hit the pause button and I just watched this woman with whom I share my life paint the room that's going to be her office where she was going to write her books. I thought, how blessed I am. Then I had to go on and scrape something out. But for a moment, just for a few seconds, hit the pause button and be grateful. And speaking of painting, we're in this big painting thing, painting the room, but it was about almost 5 o'clock, and you know, did you know you live near an ocean here? We need to do this once in a while. We said, stop the paint, close it up, let's just go down for 20 minutes. And of course, by the time we had everything closed, we missed the sunset, but it didn't matter. It was that beautiful time where it's just yellow and orange and red, that line right across the horizon. It was holy time. It was holy time. I put a little post-it note last year with my word on my computer screen, hoping that I would see it regularly and pause more often. Mixed success. But in my office every so often I would see that pause sign and I would look, and I have prints of Vincent van Gogh paintings. That's my painter of choice because everything he paints is alive. And I have a painting of a wheat field. His wheat fields are amazing. They're stunningly alive. And even the print that I have, which is still boxed up, by the way. We haven't gotten to that box yet, so it's not in my office yet. But I would just look at that for a few seconds and be reminded of a larger world. Hit the pause button. Tomorrow is Martin Luther King Jr. Day. It is a holiday, as we say. You know, the word holiday just comes from holy day. A holiday is a holy day that we have set apart for a special purpose. So tomorrow is a holy day that we set apart to remember Martin Luther King's dream, which of course is a dream that he got from the scriptures, of the kind of world that God intends for this to be. And we're going to live into that a little bit tomorrow. We're going to hit the pause button and not sort of just go through it, make it a regular, normal day. We're going to hit the pause button and do something different with our Jewish and Muslim neighbors. And live into that dream just a little bit by hitting the pause button. That Time magazine article on mindfulness said that the goal of mindfulness is to give your full attention to where you are and what you're doing in the moment. To give where you are and what you're doing your full attention in the moment. And it made a point of saying in the article that those who are teaching this at places like MIT and other places are avoiding religion. They're avoiding any reference to religion. But we don't have to. I mean, hitting the pause button, mindfulness, is really at the core of our faith tradition. You know, Jesus going off to a quiet place, taking time to pause in the midst of all the demands on him, in the midst of all the people that wanted his attention. No. He paused and took a moment to be fully attentive to God, to be fully attentive to his own spirit. And the psalm, what a crazy psalm, Psalm 46. You know, it starts with the earth trembling and the mountains quaking and the sea roaring and tumult and everything. And then it gets into the desolation on the earth, you know, all these violent images and weaponry and all. And then it's be still and know that I am God. Be still. Much more eloquent than pause. Be still and know that I am God. doesn't take but a moment to still the heart, to still the activity, just to be still and know that I'm God. There's a price you pay when you don't do that. This past summer, I was going through, the interview process, and anytime you're going through any kind of an interview process, it's sort of crazy, and it's anxious, and you wonder if you're saying the right thing, or if you're doing the right, you wonder, all this tension, and there were plenty of times I could and should have hit the pause button to be still and know that I'm God. I was thinking about that later, and I read the book Game Change, about the presidential election 6 years ago now, where Barack Obama was getting ready for one of the debates, I think. And everybody around him, all his advisors, were throwing stuff at him at the last minute and all this. And he just said, I got this. I thought, last summer there were a couple times I should have stopped myself. I should have hit the pause button and said, God's got this. God's got this. Be still. Two more stories, just two. But you can see this pause thing kept coming up. It actually worked. This happened in January, and it happened again in November. I fell asleep on the couch, woke up 2 in the morning, remote in hand. January, realized it was garbage night. The last thing I want to do is go out in a January night in Chicago, put the garbage out, but they come early in the morning, so fine. So I got up, put on a jacket, walked outside, pushed the garbage, pushed the recycling out. Why at that moment, my mind said, hit the pause button? I don't know. But I did. And so instead of just going back to the house, instead I walked around to the back of our house, and we lived on a tiny little lake. It was quite a lovely little place there. I walked back, looked out over the frozen lake. Thought of Robert Frost's poem, Between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. And just stood there for a while. The stars above, snow, white on white, the wind whistling, the wind chill. Terrible, but there's some, you can sort of convince yourself for a while that that bracing wind actually feels good. Because you feel alive, There's something sacred about all the earth being holy ground in that moment. And interestingly enough, the same thing happened in November, not long before we moved here, and the lake was frozen already in November, just as cold. And again, out in the backyard, looking out over that, thinking, I won't be seeing this again, but I will take it with me. We all have places, I think, we take with us in our hearts, and when we need to, we can go there. Maybe not physically go there, maybe not geographically go there, but we can go there and be still to our own holy and sacred places. One other time, surprisingly enough, there was a moment in the church in Illinois, fellowship hall, people greeting after worship, busy, crazy, and I found myself with no one to talk to. Really interesting. I just stopped and looked around. The same thing happened, I think, on my 3rd or 4th Sunday here. We're out there on the patio, and everybody was talking to other people, and I didn't have anyone to talk to. And again, that's sort of a neat moment. I just sort of hit the pause button and I looked around. And I think some of you were probably talking about the Chargers. And, I think they had to beat Kansas City that day or something, and I'm pretty sure they didn't. But you were at least hopeful at that point. Talking about sports, I suppose you talk about the weather here in San Diego, like when it dips into the 50s. But I also know there were other conversations going on. There were people who were facing illness, that you were people who are at a time of grief or loss. There were those kind of conversations too, those encouraging, comforting conversations, working out details of the homeless shelter, who's going to do what to whom what. They were all, and I thought, this is all sort of a holy moment here. When you are all being the church. When you are sure having fun and enjoying each other's company, but also reaching out to one another, and caring for one another, pulling people in. And at the time, I didn't so much hit the pause button as the pause button hit me. And I thought, this is a good and holy place to be. So I'm choosing a new word for 2015. You'll hear about that. But I'm going to keep the old word around for a while too, because for me, it was a really good word. So what will your word be? I encourage you to choose one. And in a couple weeks, I'm going to ask you, or even next week if you already have it, a couple weeks, I'll ask you to tell us your word anonymously. Just write it down in the pew pad, something, and we'll put together all of our words, because it's also fun to see what words other folks have chosen to be their one word, to be their spiritual focus. So may God bless you as you do that. Pray with me. Lord, I'm grateful to you for my word. For the way that one word spoke to me all year. And as we look to the new year, help us to hear the word that you would speak to us, each of us, in our own time. We pray in Christ's name, for Christ's sake, and for the world's sake, and for our own sakes. And let all God's people say, Amen.